Hey y'all, this is Rick here with Uncommon Communion coming at you on Thursday morning early. And I am recording because I went somewhere really interesting this evening and I want to tell you about it. I also want to connect it to some of the things that we are seeing right now in our current events. Before that, let's begin as we always begin by recognizing, realizing, affirming, and celebrating that we are always and everywhere in the holy presence of the more and each other. So, let me tell you a little bit first about my daughter. This is my younger daughter who is a senior at OSU. And before I say that, though, I just want to say this before I forget that this has been a really nice week because on Monday, my oldest daughter and her wife came to visit. And just 2 days later, I got to spend time with my younger daughter. So, as a dad and a parent of adult children in their early, almost mid 20s, that just warms my heart. So, just wanted to say that. So, my younger daughter, is very interested and has always been interested in cults. Cults, cults, right? Little side story that when we went out to California a few years ago, when she was younger, I don't even know if she was in college at the time, she had the chance with me to go to Los Angeles. We landed in LA before we went down to San Diego, drove down. And I said, "What do you want to see today in LA? We have time." She said, "I want to go see the Scientology headquarters." And we did. And then we saw the beach and other places, but that was her top thing. So when we saw that coming to one of the theaters here in Columbus, one of the smaller ones, was a woman, one person show, presentation, kind of infotainment teaching piece about cults, the psychology of cults. It piqued our interest. And Caitlin had no one else to go with. I was interested. I bought her ticket. We had a quick dinner beforehand. And it was a really interesting, and thought provoking evening. I'm not going to tell you everything about it. I am going to put a link to this young woman, Ashlyn, her name is. I'll put a link to her website that is called People Leave Cults. And that's her job, is helping people readjust after they leave a cult. And it was a fascinating evening because, first of all, it was pretty low key. I thought it was going to be some kind of dramatic, smoke and mirrors, ominous videos. It wasn't. It wasn't anything like that, actually. It was basically her on stage talking with a presentation, a fairly minimal presentation, that on slides, that had clips illustrating her points. 2 minute, 2.5 minute, very short clips of people from cults and people in cults and so forth. And she talks about the life cycle of someone in a cult. And again, it was a real reminder of how common these these are. She at the beginning talked about who is vulnerable to a cult. And she said it's really in two different categories of people. One is people who are going through life changes, times in their life when they're looking for um, connection, when they're looking for identity, when they're looking for purpose. And she put a whole list of those things up. Then there was another list about people who have great needs. Populations who are maybe neurodivergent, right? Or people who have basic needs, or elderly, or sick, or people like that who are seeking something very tangible. And then she had us looking at this list up on the slide behind her, the screen behind her. And she says, "How many of you have been in one or both of these categories at some point in your life?" And of course, everybody raised their hands, right? Because we're all there, especially the life changes. And I think that was such a good point to recognize vulnerability that each of us have to these groups that are seeking to form our identities through coercive means. And that was really, kind of the key point, that there is this, sometimes we could call it brainwashing, but it's this manipulation where there's a power dynamic and our freedom is being taken from us, right? And in many ways, we're giving that up, even as we don't recognize that. Where this relates to current events, I was kind of wondering if she was going to talk about MAGA as a cult. Earlier in her presentation, she talked about the manosphere and used that as one of her kind of examples, right? And of course, there's tremendous overlap between the manosphere and the MAGA movement, kind of Venn diagram, I guess, if you will. It wasn't until the Q&A at the very end people could submit electronically questions to her. And one of the questions she was asked was, is MAGA a cult or not? And people clapped with that I clapped when that question was asked, because I was wondering, what would she think about that? And she gave what she called a nuanced answer. And she really said that, even though there is certainly behavior that looks that way, and she was more concerned about white supremacy, Christian nationalism, ways that is happening, which is not, again, necessarily MAGA, but overlap in many ways. But she was saying that, calling it a cult is probably the last thing we want to do with people who are in that mindset, who are under the thrall of the baby king, right? And because, again, that's just because calling something a cult, pointing a finger, wagging at someone who is in a group, even if we can recognize that, until and unless they experience some kind of pain about being in that cult, and not necessarily pain of ostracization, but pain related to identity, pain related to their economics, pain related to their own life, they're not going to see it as such, and they're not going to leave. The life cycle of a person in a cult, or the pathway, the journey that again made up a lot of her presentation, was really saying, when someone is at the bliss stage, they're pretty much unreachable. And saying, hey, you're in a cult, wagging our finger, that's not going to be helpful. So that was really thoughtful. That was thought provoking to me, and important for me to kind of consider as I, think and label and talk and speak and write and so forth. There was one thing that she did say, and I'll close with this thought before I read a prayer here. And it has to do with the way that Epstein and Maxwell and Trump, by being a close associate with those two, acted, right? One of the things that she said, and she gave a really powerful example. Again, she was showing these little clips of survivors of cults and so forth. She says one of the things that in the last stage, once someone leaves a cult, right, there's this whole reconstruction of their identity. And especially when they are dealing with the hurt and the pain that was inflicted upon them. And she says that, experience and research and I think common sense has shown is that one of the ways that the survivors can move out of that pain and that identity crisis is through a sense of justice for the perpetrators of the harm that they found when they were within inside of the structure. Now, the operation that Epstein Maxwell ran and that Trump seems to have known about and did nothing about wasn't a cult per se. It was exploitive. And there was this sense still in the survivors that there is not justice, right? This week we are reading the memoir of Ms. Dupre, right? And one of the things that is so clear is the pain that was inflicted upon these survivors, right? Some of them have spoken out. Some of them seem to really be, um, moving forward with their lives. Others haven't spoken, and we have no idea, again, where they are or what is going on. What we do know is that bringing this to the light, this toxic cover up, this toxic ring of trafficking and pedophilia and blackmail, all of these horrible things, right? Bringing it to the light is essential for them, and it's essential, I believe, for our nation. One of the images that has been so striking and I think so symbolic, metaphorical, and literal is the dictator's demolition of the East Wing, right? And there's so much that I can say about that, and I'm not. But what I can say is this, is that when the Epstein files come out, and they are coming out in little bits and pieces, again, eventually pressure bursts pipes. I think that metaphor of a tearing apart of something that we believed was sacred, our governmental system, our system of wealth, and so forth, that metaphor, that image is going to be key. And I really hope that when we get to that day, that the people in MAGA, the people on the left, the people who are Republicans, Democrats, whatever, that we can together work to end the corruption that we are seeing. And that corruption, the cover up, is current and it's in the past. And justice must be served. All right, y'all, I have said enough and I need to get to bed here. I'm going to read from this book that I have been reading as part of my daily practice. These are the words of St. Oscar Romero. And today he says this, and maybe you feel this as well as you just look at the world and our country. Oscar Romero said on December 5th, 1977, he would be martyred on March 24th, 1980. He says this. He says, "My soul is sore when I learn how our people are tortured, when I learn how the rights of those created in the image of God are violated. This should not happen. Human beings without God are wild beasts. Human beings without God are a desert. Their hearts do not have flowers of love. Their hearts are perverted and they persecute their brothers and sisters." Yeah, my soul is sore. Maybe your soul is sore too. We had a moment this weekend, the All Kings, the No Kings, the All Rallies, the protests, all of that. Help my soul. My soul is still sore. We still have so much to do. But we do it together. We do it here at Uncommon Communion, and we do it in so many other places. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Blessing and good. Be bold. Be well.